to Mono Rants the Boys, the only boys rewatch podcast that doesn't know the meaning of the word schedule. I'm one of your hosts and jack of all trades, Mono, and with me as always is my co-host and master of none, Kira.
Good.
So Kira, we're back randomly, but this time we're not talking about the boys. We're talking about a book about the boys.
For a change.
Yeah. And that book is Supes Ain't Always Heroes, Inside the Complex Characters and Twisted Psychology of the Boys. And that's coming out on December the 3rd. And joining us to discuss it are the authors and co-editors, Dr. Lynn Zubernis and Dr. Matthew Snyder. Welcome on, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
You're very welcome, and thanks for coming on. And you may have chosen the least possible academic podcast to come on, but we'll do our best. But before we get into it, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourselves and maybe your relationship with the show?
Sure. I'm Dr. Lynn Zubernis. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor at Westchester University in the States. My research area is fan psychology and media psychology. So this is what I study. This is what I'm fascinated with. And I just am a fan myself of the boys. I'm really a fan of pretty much anything Eric Kripke puts his touch to. I will at least give it a try. So I started with the boys with season 1, the very first episode, and I was pretty much hooked from the beginning. And that fascination never went away. So, of course, in my typical fashion, I decided, well, we really need to write a book about this because this is just so endlessly fascinating. So that's how it came about.
Of course, that's not your first book on fandom, is it?
No, I've written, I think, 7 books on fandom and fan psychology, some of them about my other favorite Eric Kripke show, Supernatural.
Yes, that's one that we are quite fond of here as well on Mono Rants. And yeah, when we saw Kripke was showrunner.
Very, very excited about that.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the decisions that made us happy. And what about yourself, Matthew?
Yeah, I came about it a little bit differently. It wrote me in. I was not a fandom expert or, into any of these. Was a lot of comic books when I was growing up. I read a lot of, Spider-Man especially. And I think it was definitely part and parcel of, my growing up here in the States. I am also a clinical psychologist and a professor, but I also have a large private practice. So I do a lot of counseling. The thing that really kind of spoke to me was that The Boys was really hitting on themes that every single person struggles with. It was amazing. As over the top as they are, they're so relatable, and there's something about the boys and the things that they struggle with that really talks about the human struggle. And I could see a lot of parallels in my client.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes through in the book. It's a fascinating read. So thank you for giving us that little bit of early access to it. Can you tell us a little bit about the book itself then, and kind of where the idea came from and how you put it together?
I think the idea came from our own fascination with the show and our discussions about it. We fell into it sort of separately, so we weren't watching it together. But then we started talking about it, and we actually went back and did a rewatch of the first 2 seasons together. We would get on a Zoom call and we'd watch together and, oh, stop it there, look at that, look what they're doing there. It took us forever. We had to have intellectual discussion about them in between times. And then we decided to put together a book. And I've done a bunch of edited collections, so I kind of know how important it is to carefully pick the contributors. And we really wanted contributors who could look at the show from all different perspectives. So we didn't just want to ask psychologists. We're psychologists ourselves. We wanted to ask sociologists. We wanted to ask media experts. We wanted to ask the actors who brought the characters to life, and Derek Robertson, one of the co-creators. So we really tried to have a group of people who could talk about the show and analyze the show in very different ways. And I think that comes through in the book. I really value all the really diverse perspectives that we have in it.
Yeah, and that definitely comes across as well. That was something that I noticed. There was a few things that I would have been very easily to relate to from my own experiences reading through the book, and then there was other perspectives that I would have never necessarily considered before. So it's really nice to see them all put in there. One of the other kind of common threads in the book is the complex characters the show has, and in particular the grayness, which was something that we're both fascinated with the show. Was it something that you found fascinated you both as well?
Absolutely. My particular chapter was on toxic masculinity. And I think that, it's really interesting that Spider-Man, you know, uh, those kind of things, very black and white, very, this is, a hero and, this is a villain. I think Kripke and the other writers, they paint such a contextual and layered approach to their characters that the backstories in 8 sessions is amazing. Like in 8 sessions to get the and background and backstories and they ring true, right? Even from a psychologist, even from somebody that looks like abnormal psychology, like you think of, well, how does a narcissist get created? And in this completely fantastical way, they nail it.
Oh, they really do.
Yeah, because I found that the show is far more grey in terms of morals than the graphic novel. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the graphic novel as a fan of comic books.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They're well worth a read, but they are far more, the villains are villains, they're bad, they're good. Even when, say, who am I thinking about? Payback?
Mm-hmm.
Where they're showing, especially in the graphic novel, you get pop claw, self-harming, all of that, which is still, even though it's not done in a very friendly way, you still feel bad for the character, even though they're never portrayed like that. And I quite like the way they've pulled some of that into the show as well.
Yeah, I think in the comics, it's more just the grey. You only really see the grey in kind of the main characters, but they've really managed to put that nuance into all the characters in the show.
Which I really think is a very brave choice. I mean, ostensibly Butcher is set up to be the hero of the show, and going into it in the beginning, you see him as the hero, but very quickly you start to see just how gray that character is, that he's not really the hero. Is he even really very different from Homelander? Sometimes no. So I think that's a gutsy thing to do, and they were trusting their audience to be able to look at that grayness and see it as something that is realistic and something that is like more interesting than looking at something in black and white.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I can't think of how many times we've shouted at the screen at the choices Butcher has made and continues to make throughout the 3 seasons. And it's just because it's so compelling when he's making these choices. You're just like, no, why? You know better than this. Why are you doing this? And it's nice to see that nothing's the black and white in the show.
Yeah.
That you get that reflection of how things are in a more realistic world. But do we think there is any regular heroes or regular villains on the show?
More true heroes?
I don't think there's anyone who is the stereotypical sort of perfect kind of hero. I mean, I identify with Yui. I think Yui is the closest to being, he's certainly, when you think about like the hero's journey, that's Yui. It's probably no coincidence. Well, I don't know. His name is Yui Campbell, but maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe Yui is meant to be walking the hero's journey.
That was something I only twigged myself the other day as well when I was talking about it. I was like, hey, Huey Campbell, Joseph Campbell's hero.
Yeah.
I consider his traumatic birth event to be Robin dying. That's the start of his journey. That's always, you've got the weird or mystical birth sequence.
Yeah.
And I'd never thought about it that way, which I really enjoyed. I was like, ooh, I'm going to go back and have a watch and have him start pointing.
Yeah. And then he moves from sort of the mundane, he's a shopkeeper, the common man, everyday life, to encountering the fantastical, the truth about the Supes, has lots of adventures. And then I do think it's interesting because his transformation and his victory is more internal. It's who he becomes. It's how he starts to understand who he is and break away from the things that he's absorbed, those messages about toxic masculinity, so he can not feel like he has to follow those things and he can do what he really feels is the right thing to do. So I do think I see Huey as a hero, but he's certainly a flawed hero. He's not a perfect cartoonish hero.
No, and where would you place Annie in that kind of scenario as well? Because I do, for myself, she is probably the goodest one, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. I mean, I think Annie follows her own hero's journey and has her own transformation. It's interesting. Her victory, I think, it sort of subverts the hero's journey, because she goes from the fantastical, being a Supe, to embracing who she is as sort of the common human. Like, she goes back to that. So she's subverting it in a different pattern than Yui, but the commonality is that's still a victory for her, because she's discovering who she is, not who her mom wanted her to be, not who being injected with V made her into, but who she really is. So I think hers is also a hero's journey, but it doesn't quite follow the traditional path.
No.
But even Annie isn't without her grayness,
Exactly.
particularly in season 2. Her journey in season 2, we see a lot more kind of grey Annie as she tries to figure out who she wants to be. Like,
yeah, very, very compelling to feel like you want to be pulled into being a social media hero and wearing the costume that's going to get you the most followers. And, you know, anybody, I think the point is, would be pulled towards that. And it takes a lot of guts to actually walk away from that and, you know, throw that costume in the trash, as she does near the end of season 3.
Yeah, and thinking about that now, actually, it'd be very interesting to see the dynamic of the boys' team with Annie fully on board, and the way the rest of the team feels towards Butcher after the events of season 3.
Well, the other interesting thing, if you think about it too, is that they thought they were born this way, and then through the arc of the show, we see that no, in reality, right, they're dosed up, and that it's all this big conspiracy, and then we see Peter and Huey make a decision then to inject themselves, right, and interesting, like now anybody could be a superhero, but at what cost?
Yeah, it's the metaphorical ambrosia and nectar.
Exactly.
Matt, I wanted to ask you in particular, what do you think about Stormfront weaponizing toxic masculinity and using it to motivate this army of followers? Good strategy?
Yeah, I mean, like Stormfront in and of herself is such an interesting character, right? I think that,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and the way that she uses social media, right, in such a dynamic way, and I think she had a great line. I don't need 1 million followers. I just need like 1,000 fanatics or something.
Five angry guys,
yeah. And I think she actually uses it, like you said, as her own weapon. And I think the thing that's interesting about like Homelander or Stormfront, they really look at people as dumb and dull and not worth it, and just almost like cattle or sheep, or something to be used and manipulated. And I think if there's any line that you can draw between our quote unquote villains and the people before, is at least Butcher feels bad sometimes. At least Butcher thinks he's doing it to avenge, the death of his wife. Like, it's almost like that's the narcissistic stance, right? That Stormfront's to, like, I don't care about anybody but me, right? And then we find out she's a Nazi, and of course that kind of is an interesting concept in and of itself, because Homelander is like the American persona of that. So the juxtaposition of the Nazi stance and the political goings on of the United States right now, and Homelander, it's so shocking. I can't believe people don't really see it, right? So I think that way, Stormfront becomes like almost like an anti-villain, in that we don't even know what she wants until the very end, where she realizes that it's just all about her. And the part is that it gets, as soon as she gets on her, and then Homeland.
Sorry, Matthew, I lost you there for a second. Could you just repeat the kind of last sentence you said?
Yeah, so I was saying, like, the other thing that's I think interesting is that once Stormfront gets hurt and she can't use all of her tools and abilities in social media and weaponizing the public, Stormfront's kind of in that hospital bed, and Homelander's like, well, what use are you? Like, no empathy, no no understanding of here's somebody that I care about. And yet you can see that she cares about him so much, and that she wanted that like perfect society, right? And she had to hurt to get there. So I don't know, Lynn, if you have thought, like, I feel like that's just a really interesting end to that relationship.
Yeah, and a tragic one.
Like, he doesn't even care when she kills herself, right? He's like, oh, whatever.
I mean, I think he has a little caring, but he's so damaged it doesn't really come through very well. Talking about like gray characters though, when I spoke with Aya Cash to do her interview for the book, one of the things we talked about is I did have a little bit of sympathy or empathy for Stormfront because they did give us that backstory of how she got pulled into it and her daughter and how sad she was to watch her daughter age and lose her daughter. And she wanted to recreate that family, which is something that I think everybody can relate to. And Aya herself found those things in the character to relate to as a human, but at the same time, she's this horrible character who is wanting to do horrible things that we see reflected in our own culture. So that's extra horrible. But even that character has some gray to it.
But I think you need that even in your most like despicable characters. You need to be able to kind of catch on to at least one thing in them. Otherwise, they're not as compelling.
Mm-hmm.
They're a caricature of themselves.
Yeah, if you can't understand their motivation at least. Whatever about agreeing with it, but
no, for me watching Stormfront, obviously I had read the graphic novels, I knew what was coming, but I was drawn in by her and by how compelling she was and her fuck the man kind of attitude, whilst also simultaneously towing the line with the man. Masterful. And I really was drawn in. And I was kind of like, ooh, maybe they didn't make her that bad, you know, because I kind of like her. I like what she's doing. I like the confidence that she's giving Annie. And then she'd start to drop these little lines and hints, particularly about A-Train, and you start going, oh no, wait, hold up.
In some ways, I wish I hadn't had that prior knowledge from the comics, because Aya Cash plays it so well in those first few episodes.
Yeah.
That I'd say if you didn't know when the reveal comes, you'd just be gobsmacked.
I didn't know. And it was so fascinating and so kind of appalling to realize how easily you can be drawn in, because I really liked her. I bought it in the beginning. And to realize that you have been drawn in and manipulated in that way, and then to find out what's really going on, that's really scary.
Yeah.
Because that happens in real life too.
That was the thing I found quite shocking, was a lot of the rhetoric is rhetoric that we've been seeing online through social media being mirrored exactly by somebody. And I think she says it perfectly, is people agree with what I'm saying. They just don't like the word Nazi.
Yep.
And that sent a chill through me watching it, because we've spent a lot of time mocking the followers of Homefront, as we were calling them at one point.
Yeah.
And seeing the parallels and people, especially in the fan base, agreeing with the stance and agreeing with Homelander did scare me quite a lot. People not realizing that this is a satire. Would that be something that for you guys would be disturbing to come across? Like, just in the general populace as a whole?
Yeah.
Don't forget that great scene where I think it was Mother's Milk and like he punched the stepdad, you know, because like the stepdad's kind of, like he's kind of not like, he's that everyday man. He's very, but like as soon as he went to see Homelander, he was vicious and like wanted to see blood and you could really see a lot of parallels in our society, certainly here in the United States.
Do you feel like it's mob mentality taking over?
Sometimes we worry about that. I mean, you certainly can see that is happening in some occasions. Yeah, I think, I mean, one of the things I love about The Boys is that it is bitingly on point sometimes in a way that is very frightening, but also that I think is really important for people to look at. I think we need that mirror sometimes, and it's disguised enough that you're right. Some people don't get it, which is frightening in itself. They're not seeing the parody for the parody. But I think for a lot of people, for me, it felt really validating to be like, okay, somebody else sees the insanity that is going on also. And that makes me feel good, at least, that other people are seeing the same thing. Because if we're seeing it, we can fight against it. If nobody's seeing it, we're doomed, because nobody's going to fight it if we can't even identify it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that the show does so well, and part of the reason it's so successful is it just seems to be able to hold a mirror up to society in so many different ways. And I love the comic for what it is, and it's more about the comics industry at the time, whereas the show just seems to just take aim at
corporate America as
everything,
a whole.
but yeah, corporate America and celebrity and social media in particular.
Yeah, there's one chapter, Scott Jordan's chapter, which is I forget the title of it, but it's something like who's the hero, who's the villain, or whatever. And spoiler alert, the conclusion of his chapter is kind of like, villain is not Homelander, it's not Soldier Boy, it's not Butcher, it's Vought.
Yeah.
Vought is the villain of the story.
Absolutely.
In a million different ways.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think when I was saying earlier about whether or not there were any true villains or true heroes in the show, that would probably would be my answer as well. Is Vought is the big villain. Everybody else has elements of good and bad within them, and it's just about the push and pull within each character. And there was some fascinating stuff in the book that it's really nice to see kind of stuff that might be awkward or abstract for people to understand, like PTSD or certain stuff like that.
To have that explained and how various trauma responses manifest through all of these different characters. Like you have with his OCD and his tics. I would even say Ashley with her hair loss and the hair picking. They've all responded to these traumas in different ways. And from a viewer, they appear to be realistic. So I'd like to ask, are they realistic in their portrayals of these traumas?
Yeah, there's some excellent chapters. Actually, one of our grad students actually wrote a chapter on mental health and PTSD. So it's interesting when you think about it. Again, I think the thing that draws us to something like The Boys is that on some end, it's so out of craziness. Somebody's jumping into penis and exploding, and it has nothing to do with reality. On the other hand, they portray things so accurately and so kind of developmentally appropriate. And we see a backstory of like Frenchie, and you try to understand his trauma and his trauma response and the way he wants to help. And then you look at like Mother's Milk and his OCD. And like you said, trichotillomania, hair pulling, and even somebody like Huey, where he got to a point where he was like, it doesn't pay to be good anymore. Like, remember, he had that whole kind of very much like, is it even worth anything? And I think that's the question that everybody had. Like, is the world safe? Like, am I safe? And a lot of people, because of these traumatic experiences, they look at the world as unsafe and very dangerous. And for them, it really is. And how do they respond to that? How many drugs did Frenchie take, right? Like, it's just like, it's really interesting to see each of their kind of experiences. And even somebody like Butcher, like who basically just kind of got to a place where, his brother passed away and his dad was a shit and dying of cancer. He got to the point where like, he just didn't care anymore. Like, so it's really interesting to see how everybody reacts to the trauma that they experience. And the last thing I would say that makes The Boys interesting is they ask a lot of very interesting questions. And one of the things that I think The Boys asks all the time is, how much are we willing to give up for safety or for perceived safety? Right? We had these superheroes flying around, and therefore, like, we're safe, and they keep us from, the show opened up with, them going after these robbers, right? With these teenage boys. And it's like, how much are we willing to give up to feel secure and feel safe and feel kind of okay? And I think The Boys says a lot. Like, we're willing to give up a ton. And I think that's the parallel of today's society.
Oh, yeah. Even in that first episode as well, Butcher uses that argument when he's talking about the nanny cams in the Little Teddy.
Yeah.
About how much of a $1 billion industry that is, because you get the perceived sense of safety of having the camera there watching over you. Like, so that's a question that's posed early on. It's a great show for, if not directly asking questions of the audience, certainly kind of forcing them to consider various things, like what would you do in that situation, or how you feel about these characters' choices. And when they are so compelling, it's hard not to. I think the fandom at large seems to have gravitated towards the show in a big way, and I wonder, is that partly to do with how they represent all these issues on screen?
Yeah, I think so. I think how realistic they make it, no matter how like out of this world it is to have soups flying around, it's really anchored in human experience. So people can still relate to it. Like PTSD, they have characters reacting in all kinds of different ways. Some of them show like hypervigilance and others show like avoidance and numbing and addiction to deal with it. And it's what happens in real life. They show a lot of what happens to people who experience loss. I mean, every character has experienced so much loss. We have all different reactions as humans. We grieve in so many different ways, and they show that. So even though the circumstances are fantastical, what happens to the humans is very realistic. And I think that everybody is kind of latched onto that. They can relate to these characters because they are very realistic, even though they're totally fantastical at the same time.
Oh yeah, I mean they're characters that I always love from the comics, but they've turned them into different beasts altogether on the show, and they're so well fleshed out. And I didn't think they were characters that I could possibly love more, but they've managed to make me love them even more.
Yeah, even some of the ones I didn't want to watch. I mean, my chapter on Soldier Boy, part of it is my own lamenting of, oh man, I know I'm really not supposed to be having any sympathy or empathy for this character, but you showed me all this backstory and you showed me him getting tortured and you told me what his father did to him, and now I don't want you to kill him. And I know I should want you to kill him, but I don't.
I have to admit, he did win me over when he had that little sad lip quiver in Bolivia, and then he sucked it back up again.
I know.
Yeah, and that got me, and I was like, I know you're a horrible person, but that got me.
The whole Soldier Boy thing was just you hit the nail on the head in your chapter, Lynn, when you're using phrases like, oh no, we're about to see him do really, really horrible things, and then the other part of your brain is like, how did you phrase it? But
sweet baby daddy granny, it was like donkey,
murder daddy kitten or something like that. It was just and that was the fan response at large to Jensen. And I think
it's Jensen Ackles.
It's partly, yeah, the inbuilt fandom that comes with Jensen Ackles. We're always going to love him no matter what he did. But yeah, the show does manage to just kind of have you never really sure which way to go with Soldier Boy as they kind of feed you the information about him, because you're like, oh well, he's broken out from Russia, so maybe he was gone against fought in the first place. Oh, maybe he was an asshole back in the day, but we're not quite sure. And there's always ways you could justify his actions early on, like, oh, maybe he didn't mean to kill Kimiko, or not kill, but blast Kimiko. He was just, frightened and scared of being broken out. He didn't know what was happening. Oh, he got overwhelmed and had a kind of traumatic flashback when he was in New York. But the more it went on, it got harder and harder to justify.
I mean, at the very least, he is very comfortable with ignoring the collateral damage, which maybe he doesn't intentionally inflict. He keeps saying, I'm not a bad guy. I didn't want to hurt people. But collateral damage seems to follow him wherever he goes, and he's not really too concerned about that.
No, but interestingly, actually, something you said earlier, Matthew, about Stormfront and Homelander both seeing themselves as so far above normal people and kind of viewing them as, cattle or whatever. You don't really get that reading off Soldier Boy, I don't think. He does think he's maybe more important and stronger and better than the people, but not on the same level as Stormfront or Homelander. And I wonder, did that help as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that character is written in a very nuanced way, and Ackles is better than anybody I know in portraying those kind of subtle nuances. So, he does have that overt kind of narcissism of, I'm stronger, you're wearing a cape, like, don't tell me you're strong. But he also, you see his vulnerability repeatedly. You see that he still inside hears the voice of his dad saying he's a disappointment. So he doesn't really believe those things about himself. And that gives the character a vulnerability and a fragility that I think feels different than Homelander and Stormfront. Even though you see their backstory too, and they certainly also have had horrible trauma that shaped them, but they've got their defenses up pretty well. There's not a whole lot of cracks in their armor, and Soldier Boy has a lot of cracks in his armor.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Now, I do have to ask, if you got any of these characters as a patient, who would be your least favorite? Like, who would be, oh my God, no, I'm not treating them, somebody else can have this? And who would has the most potential for, say, recovery and rehabilitation?
Oh, that's such a good question. We've never been asked that question. Oh, Matt, do you have an answer?
Probably like to see, Huey or Frenchie, or I would love to see Mother's Milk. I think they would all be really interesting characters. I think that obviously Homelander would probably, by definition, be kind of one of the most difficult, just because of he's such a narcissist, and I actually have seen a lot of narcissists, and the thing about narcissists is like they believe what they want to believe, right? And they'll turn anything that you say into something that fits their story or the way that they look at things, right? So they have very little empathy, very little remorse. And understanding remorse. I'll take Soldier Boy. I'll take Frenchie. Give me somebody, even Butcher, right? Give me somebody that can get somebody else's shoes. On some level, somebody like Homelander, like he doesn't even get it on a deep human level. He was isolated and grow up in a laboratory, and yeah, on some level, I think he kind of knows that, but yeah, that's the one I probably wouldn't want to say.
That's the one you're shuttling off to an intern.
Yeah.
I'd give him to Lynn. Lynn's a better therapist than me. So.
Help him to me. No. I don't want him. No, I agree. I think that, I also have had narcissists as clients, and they're just, it's very hard to work with them. What we used to call personality disorders, are very ego syntonic. Like they feel synchronous with your ego. So people don't like to have them challenged. It's comfortable to keep that narcissism, and people don't want you poking at it and trying to get rid of it. I think Butcher would be a really tough client for me to have too. That character, I think, rubs me the wrong way more than a lot of viewers. That character kind of infuriates me because you can see glimpses of his humanity and it's there, but he is shut off to it. Boy, he is really good at pushing that away. So I think I'd find him at the very least frustrating as a client.
As a follow on to that, then, what would you make of Butcher's dependency on Huey as a conscience?
I think that would actually be a way of getting through to him therapeutically. The fact that even though he's afraid to have his own conscience, he's too cut off from that. There's a part of him that still does want to do the right thing, and he recognizes in Huey someone who can be that kind of canary for him. And there's a part of him that does want that and still does want to do the right thing. So I think that's very hopeful, how Butcher and Huey, how that relationship has played out for Butcher. But I still don't want him as a client.
But if neither of you want Homelander as a client, then how do you feel about the way Stan Edgar deals with him? Because obviously we can't change the past. Homelander's upbringing is the way it was. So what would you have to say about the way Stan deals with him? Is it something that he could kind of sustain, or is he just kind of barely just staying on top of a ticking time bomb?
I think Stan Edgar is a really interesting character, and I think he is the, kind of the personification of Vought until he gets, kind of overthrown, right? So I think there is no way to deal with him. Homelander is a nuclear weapon that's going to go off, and I think on some level Stan Edgar knows that. So I think Vought always tries to placate, which is, I think, very typical. With narcissists, there's a lot of placation, and also, well, what can they do for me? Can I use this to my advantage? I hate to draw political kind of parallels, but you kind of know what I'm talking about, right? Like, so Stan Edgar, I think, points Homelander away from him, and because he knows that that's a weapon that's going to go off. He just doesn't want to have it go off on him. Unfortunately for Stan, I think eventually it kind of does, and that's what we kind of see at the end. And I think the arc of that character and him kind of working with the church, and like I think he was like really, I think at the end he understood that he was playing with fire.
Do you think that his approach being so radically different to Stillwell's, which is almost like an Oedipal mother figure approach, do you think that hindered him at the end?
Well, it's interesting because we know what happened to Stillwell too, right? Like, so again, I go back to my point that everybody wants to deal with the narcissist in a different way.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any real way to do that. Because, you know, like, again, how can I use this to my advantage, or, you know, how can I, and I think in her power, sexuality, or the, you know, motherly personas, whatever she could possibly do. But that's the thing about a narcissist is that, you know, at the very end, they don't care. But I think it's very shocking when he uses his laser rays to just incinerate her with no remorse.
I think he may regret it.
Oh, he does after the fact. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we see that with the milk drinking. Just
Oh, he does. He does. No, I think he does regret it, but I also think I mean, narcissists are very easily threatened. If a narcissist thinks that you have abandoned them or you have betrayed them in some way, there's no capability for forgiveness. So in that moment, he felt like he had no choice. Does he wish he still had her? Absolutely. But in that moment, when he felt she betrayed him and manipulated him, he couldn't let it stand.
Yeah. And it's not that they are sad what they did. There's lost. I mean, you know, think of like Doppelganger when he turns into Homelander. He's like, well, you know, sex with yourself. Like that's kind of the ultimate narcissistic stance. Like, oh, I know what you want, right? And Homelander had to actually think about it first before he kind of, you know, had his reaction and then, you know, killed Doppelganger. But I don't know, Lynn, we've had a lot of conversations about that scene specifically. So, you know, I kind of want to hear your thoughts on it. It's so telling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it points to the fact that what everyone was trying to do, Edgar, Stillwell, Vought in general, what everyone is trying to do is manipulate this narcissist, Homelander. And the fact that Doppelganger completely blew it and ended up paying with his life is you can't. It's really, really hard to figure out. There's a chapter in the book called something like what do you do with a sentient nuke? That's what Homelander is. He's a human with all of the complicated emotions of a very damaged human, but he's also a nuke. And everybody who has tried and thought, oh, I haven't figured out. I know what to do to keep him under control, to get him, to point him to where I want to point him, thinks they can do that, and it backfires on them. Butcher tries to do a similar thing. There's a point where Frenchie says, you just see me as a weapon who you can point. Kamiko feels the same way. So Butcher is trying to do very much the same thing, and it backfires on him eventually too, because Frenchie and Kamiko say, no, I'm not your weapon. I have my own wants and needs, and I'm gonna do what I want to do. So it's a dynamic that runs through. It's actually a very hopeful message because it says that even though in reality there are all these corporations and people in power and systems that are trying to manipulate us, ultimately people are hard to manipulate up to a point. Like it works for a while, but people have consciousness and people can make their own decisions. And I think that's a hopeful message.
And I think those sort of parallels in the show, like between, you know, Butcher and Homelander and the actions and their choices, you see it a couple of times in other characters throughout the show, like Maeve's relationship with Homelander versus Crimson Countess's relationship with Soldier Boy. And I think those parallels and the different choices they make really help the show stand out, because you can see you really get inside the characters, because you know, well, this guy's going this way and this guy's going another way. But I think there's one character that doesn't have any parallels on the show, and like Kara, I kind of want to know what you guys think about the Deep and just whether or not there's any hope for him. Is there any hope for the Deep at all?
I mean, I hope so. Chase Crawford does such a good job with portraying that character. He is sometimes so completely unlikable, but again, you get these little glimpses, you know, when he first was given the V and he can hear the lobsters in the tank saying, "Please rescue me." And there's a whole through line of him empathizing with non-humans and wanting to help them, and it fails spectacularly every time. But I feel for him in that. He's not very bright. So people do manipulate him and he falls for all kinds of manipulations, and he doesn't have a lot of efficacy. He doesn't have a superpower that's very respected by the rest of the suits. He's sort of a tragic character. You know, he's one of the seven, but sometimes he's not. So I hope that he survives and we continue to see him, because I like him as a flawed, sort of tragic character and yet still a Supe.
He is great. What about yourself, Matthew? What's your professional opinion on the Deep?
Yeah, I mean, talk about negative self-talk. Like, there's some great scenes where, and I forget the actor who is a great actor portrays his gills. What a wonderful scene,
Yeah.
right? And so compelling and so relatable. And us as psychologists and as therapists, boy, yeah, what a great scene, because they like talk about negative self-talk. And again, like Lynn said, this flawed character that can't accept himself and can't seem to get out of his own way. And yeah, like I'm a big The Deep fan. I feel like when he's sitting in the bar and he's like drinking his way, and he's like, I used to be in the seven, and nobody takes him for everybody takes him for granted. Nobody like really pays any attention to him. That's such a compelling character that I think people can absolutely relate to. I've certainly felt that way, right? And I think that's what makes The Deep so compelling, is because we've all felt that way at some time.
Yeah, I think he's definitely a favorite of ours anyway.
I adore him. Mind you, I've also been very sadly bailed out looking like that. So I feel for him. I haven't had the full meltdown in the water park, which I think is my favorite moment of his.
Oh, when he's screaming at the kids about how they don't know the crushing, dark, deep loneliness of the sea.
Yes. I kind of related a lot with that. I was like, Chase, I have been pushed to that limit.
Chase Crawford he's just brilliant. I mean, all the actors of the show are fantastic, and the writing, everything about it is fantastic, to be honest with you. Like, it's hard not to like the show. And I think you've both done, and all of your contributors have done a fantastic job of just getting many and varied points across as to why the show is as successful as it is and why it's as meaningful as it is. So thank you both for putting it out there. Like, it's a great read. It really is.
Thank you. It was a real labor of love. It felt really good to us to put it together, and we were so immensely happy with the thoughtful contributions that came back from everyone, really. Even like the interview that I did with Jensen Ackles that's his chapter. Like, he was so incredibly thoughtful in that interview about Soldier Boy and his portrayal that expanded how I thought about it too. So everybody really came through.
Yeah, and even the interview. Well, I mean, there was Aya and Nathan Mitchell and Jim Beaver as well, and they all had really interesting points that I wouldn't have considered about their characters and the show at large in general. So it's nice to get that actor's perspective as well as the fans' perspective. But thank you so much for joining us today, guys, and thanks to all the book's contributors for their hard work, for making such a fascinating and honestly quite educating read as well. Once again, the book is coming out on December the 3rd and is available from smartpopbooks.com/theboys.
Yep.
But I'll put all relevant links in the show notes. But while we still have you, would either of you like to promote any other books, past, present, or upcoming?
You can also find my books on Supernatural, including 2 of them that were written with the cast of Supernatural. So all the main actors wrote chapters, actually wrote chapters for those books at peacewhenyouaredone.com. And that's Family Don't End with Blood, and there'll be Peace When You Are Done.
And yourself, Matthew? Anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah, I don't really have any. I'm not like Lynn. I don't have too many books out there. I'm just out there doing therapy and teaching classes. But yeah, if anybody wants therapy for in the U.S., I guess I could plug myself for that. Just kidding. So.
If this book is anything to go by, please keep writing books about these kind of shows.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, just superheroes in general. Because I can't praise the book enough.
Yeah, maybe it's a new thing for us. I don't know. Maybe we'll write the psychology, of different superheroes. So who knows?
Well, I mean, there's a whole other spin-off show around the corner as well in Gen V, so there'll be plenty more ripe material there.
I just got the screeners and watched the first episode last night. It's pretty amazing.
Oh, because we are recording this the day before it is officially released to us plebeians, unlike you, Lynn, who got special access. But yeah, look, guys, thank you so much for coming on. As for us, we will be back whenever.
When the SAG after strikes end.
Yeah, well, we just seem to come back whenever we feel like it. But in the meantime, if you want, you can head back and listen to some of our previous episodes, including the time we interviewed the Boys Comics co-creator Derek Robertson. Or you can head over and listen to our other podcast, Mono Rants at the Movies. Or if you want, you can come and chat with us on Twitter at RantsMono, on Instagram at monorants_the_boys, or you can send your own rants to monorantspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks so much.